At the turn of the century, the 1900s, it was the age of the hourglass. And you can see by looking at this woman's incredible body, and then at the hourglass next to her, you can see why it is known as the age of the hourglass in terms of fashion. Alright, let's look at the world of the 1900s. We saw it starting, right? When we did the 1890s, remember the gay 90s, and how the world changed because of this, electricity. Well, electricity would be even more widespread at the turn of the century. Electricity lit up the home. It lit up the night. It lit up the world. People could travel around because of electricity on electric tram cars. It was when the first subways started to appear. And at the turn of the century, we see the car increasingly gaining momentum and overtaking the horse and aeroplanes. My goodness, what a modern world it was. Telephones were seen in more and more homes as well. So you can see this world really isn't that different to our own. This is the Edwardian era. Remember that word, know that word and know what it means, Edwardian. And it is given this name because of this guy, King Edward VII of England. And there he is with that rather spectacular beard. We can use the word Edwardian to describe things that aren't English. We can talk about the Edwardian period in terms of American architecture, for example. And this is Edwardian style. And of course, we'll examine this in much more detail in a second. Although Edward VII died in 1910, the term Edwardian is often extended to include the years leading up to World War I, which began in 1914. During the first 15 years or so of the 20th century is known as the Edwardian period. Never, ever confuse Edwardian with Victorian, like 99% of the population seem to. Alright, like we're going to do with every decade, let's start with the 1900s body ideal. Every decade had its own ideal body, and of course the relationship between fashion, ideals, and the ideal body is symbiotic, so here she is. This is the ideal body of the Edwardian era. Elegant, tall, long neck, full bosom, very full bosom, a tiny waist, and full hips. Did anyone actually have this body? Well, this lucky lady did. We'll look at her later. Look at that tiny waist. This is also known as a wasp-waisted body, a wasp waist. That is a wasp. To remind you what a wasp looks like, it's not like a little round chubby bumblebee. A wasp is made of these two bulbous halves, and there is the wasp's waist, and she is wasp-waisted. Right, I just mentioned the symbiotic relationship between fashion and the ideal body. Well, let's see it play out. This is how it played out. And if we put the right hat on her, you can see that this is the silhouette of the first 10 years of the 20th century. But how did women achieve this incredible shape? Well, with corsetry. This really is the age of the extreme corsets, the first 10 years or so of the 20th century. This is a newspaper ad or a magazine ad. And you can see, look, all of the exclusive designs. Large sales have proven it to be the best domestic corset. Though slightly different, but they all achieve the same shape, as you can see. Every woman wore a corset. If you didn't wear a corset, you were like slovenly. There was something wrong with you. You were mentally deranged if you didn't wear a corset. It was so improper not to. But of course you wanted to because you wanted to have that body. And corsets worked. This is a contemporaneous image of a woman without her corset on, and then look how her waist changes with the corset. And just to give you that visual again, without a corset and with a corset, they worked. They worked a little too well for some people, though. There are always people who take things to the extreme. But check her out. Now, what I find interesting about this picture on the left, I think it's been altered. It's been doctored. They didn't have Photoshop in those days, obviously, but you could certainly manipulate the image. And I think that this image has been manipulated to give her this ridiculously tiny waist. I don't think a human being could have a waist that small. But what's interesting is that you can see right here, more than 100 years ago, at the turn of the 20th century, women were being fed unrealistic ideals, weren't they? Just like when we look at all those photoshopped images of perfect size 0 models, perfect bodies and no cellulite. It's been photoshopped, right? This is early photoshopping. And you can see that, wow, women have been fed these false ideals that we're all supposed to be living up to for a very long time. There were other ways, however, along with your corset, that women would try to achieve the kind of waist that you see in these two pictures. There was a craze at the turn of the century for ingesting tapeworm eggs. You would ingest the egg, the tapeworm would hatch and it would grow in your intestine, and it would eat a great deal of the food that you were eating, so you got thinner and thinner, so you could get a tiny little waist like this, but you didn't want to lose your boobs and you didn't want to lose your bum. So a lot of women did pad out their fronts. Anyway, the tapeworm would grow inside you, and this is a human tapeworm at full length. Look at that ruler down there, that's 12 inches, so this is several feet long. This would be growing and living inside you. It would be your little friend to carry around with you. Evidently, when you are infested with a tapeworm, you have horrible breath and constant diarrhea. Once you decided you wanted to get rid of your little friend, there were a couple of very unpleasant ways to do it equally unpleasant. I have to show you now an image much magnified of a tapeworm's head. That's a tapeworm's head. I have no idea whether or not these women ingested tapeworms, but they are certainly wearing corsets. And look at how extraordinary their bodies are. To the 1900s beauty ideal, again, we'll do this every decade. This was the ideal feminine beauty of the turn of the century. And she was completely invented. She is called the Gibson Girl. And she was invented by this man, Charles Dana Gibson. Charles Dana Gibson was an American illustrator, and he invented this woman. And she would appear in fashion magazines and advertising, and this is another view of her. I just mentioned he was an American, right? So this is our first American international beauty ideal. Come on, prior to the 20th century, we were looking, beauties of the Italian Renaissance or Elizabeth I. French people. Suddenly, we had an American beauty ideal. And this is what she looked like. She was sort of snooty looking, Elizabeth Snooty, with this very beautiful face, these sort of heavy eyes, slightly downward cast, and its incredible hairdo. It has a name, it's called a cottage loaf hairdo. There we go, a cottage loaf. And this is a cottage loaf. It was a type of bread that was popular. And this was the look that women strove to achieve, like these two ladies having tea. They are Gibson Girls come to life. But this beauty aesthetic was across the board. This is how everybody wanted to look, and everybody tried to look this way. We see it played out again and again and again. So how was it achieved? This is the first time we're going to be meeting our pretty, fresh-faced, makeupless girl here. Well, makeup wasn't very popular at the turn of the century. Women just wore a little bit of rouge, and then of course they'd have their incredible cottage loaf hairdo, which they would often decorate with feathers and tones and things like that. So it was a very natural look, and you can see it here and here. And here is a contemporary fashion image, which is obviously referencing the Gibson Girl and the turn of the century ideal. And here on the runway. Every era we're going to be looking at style icons, and this is our first style icon. The woman we saw at the beginning with this incredible wasp-waisted hourglass figure. Her name was Miss Camille Clifford, and she was an actress. She was Belgian originally, but she made it big in New York. She made it big, but her waist was small. Like this. What an incredible figure. And there is another picture. She is the Gibson Girl, isn't she? With that snooty look, the cottage loaf hair, and those slightly heady, downward cast eyes. And also she is throwing a swell front there, isn't she? Every era we're going to look at the dominant fashion idea. And here is the dominant fashion idea for the first 10 years of the 20th century. And there she is, in a lovely turn of the century setting. Let's break it down. Very large, much adorned hat, a long, equally adorned dress. And these dresses were very long, especially formal dresses. I should note that for running around in everyday life, skirts were getting a little shorter and more practical, but this was the high fashion ideal still. And this very cinched waist. Basically, the world was moving much too quickly at the turn of the century. The fashion clung on to old ideas about adornment being equal to status. The more stuff you had on you, the more fashionable you were. Modernity, urbanization, and the new technology made women cling to these ultra-feminine fashion ideals and to clothing that was totally inappropriate for a world of cars and trams and very soon aeroplanes. On they did. Look at these pictures. Look how incredibly uncomfortable and strange it must have been to get into a subway dressed like this, let alone go to a beach dressed like this. This hourglass, sort of sinuous ideal was really informed by the dominant aesthetic of the era, which was called Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau was a movement in art and architecture and interior design and textiles and everything really that began, in fact, in the late 1800s, but would really come to fruition and world dominance at the beginning of the 20th century. Art Nouveau was all about swirling, sinuous, curvilinear shape. It was a return to nature in this increasingly dominant world. It was a return to Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, Carolinian ideals, like this chair here. It's incredible, isn't it? So organic, it looks like it's growing. And this is an electric table lamp. But take a look at that swirling shape in the form of a lily. And of course, in graphic art, look at this ad. Here, this is an ad for cigarettes. And look at that hair. It's like the roots of a tree or the branches of a tree, isn't it? And it is done by Mucha. This is a name that you should know in association with Art Nouveau. Mucha was the greatest Art Nouveau commercial artist. And he was very famous for painting these rather horsey-looking girls with this incredible, flowing, sinuous hair and these kind of pseudo-medieval dresses. So think about the principles of Art Nouveau, and then let's take a look at a fashion image from the era. And you'll see that really what it does is speak to this obsession with curves. And think about the cottage-low hair. Again, this obsession with swirls and curls. Well, the sands of the hourglass start to shift when we get to about 1907, 1908 to this shape. Still very corseted, but you can see it's slightly different. This is called the pigeon dress because it looks like a pigeon in this S shape with the chest stuck out like a pigeon's breast and then the butt stuck out at the back. Here, ours for our new Paris shape, straight front, extreme low bust and long hip. These were known as the safety corsets because it was believed that they were better for your internal organs than the hourglass corset that we saw at the turn of the century. The safety corset, they don't look very safe to me. And here is a contemporaneous diagram showing the before and after effects of an old-style corset and the nude figure. It's so ridiculous. But again, it's really got that Art Nouveau curve, that sort of curvilinear shape, doesn't it? And there it is, in a photograph. Again, what an odd way to want to look, and yet it's strangely graceful. And you will note that in the advertising, in the diagram, and in this photograph, all of these ladies have the cottage-low hair. As does she. Now, I think it's about time we talked about those incredible, huge hats. They were called cartwheel hats. And here are two ladies wearing these massive cartwheel hats, and they're called cartwheel hats because of the shape of a cartwheel. These hats were enormous. Remember, during this era, people were still clinging to the idea that the more stuff you had, the bigger it was, the more stuff you put on top of it, the more fashionable you were. Wow, that is a big hat. Sometimes these hats could weigh up to 50 pounds. Others are heavy when taken in a huge, huge heap. And look at that. Now, she would have been considered incredibly fashionable because she had such a huge hat. And doesn't she look like Helena Bonham Carter? I just noticed that. Let's look at the Edwardian palette. This is going to be one of our continuance palettes. It was very soft, very feminine. Lilac was one of the big colors, like in this dress here. Soft, dusty rose pink. Ivory. Very feminine colors, very soft pastels. The dominant high fashion look. There we go. It was all about embellishment. I think I've made that clear, haven't I? And here are some examples of just how ridiculous it got. So if we take this lady wearing a very simple and very beautiful vintage dress, she looks great, but she wouldn't be considered very fashionable. So shall we make her fashionable? Shall we get her ready to go to Ascot or to walk up and down Fifth Avenue? Well, first of all, we have to give her cottage-low hair, and then lots and lots and lots of lace, and lots of bows, and more embroidery, and more lace. Oh, and some artificial flowers. That would be nice, wouldn't it? And a train, and a big cartwheel hat, but it's a little bit unfashionable still, so let's add as much cap as we possibly can, and give her a parasol. Parasols were the accessory for fashionable ladies, but obviously with hats this size, they were not used to protect a woman from the sun. Can you guess what they were used for? They were to help her balance as she walked. Imagine you are walking around with a hat that weighs, oh my God, a great 10 pounds, 20 pounds, up to 50 pounds of ostrich feather on your head. You've got this weird tight corset on, also your dress. Although it's made with, very beautiful lace in a very light palette, it's going to be heavy. So think about a tightrope walker using a pole to help him balance. Very fashionable Edwardian ladies would use a parasol. Do you know there were species of birds that became extinct in the Edwardian era simply because they were killed off to decorate fashionable ladies' hats. But you couldn't dress like that and want to be. That would be ridiculous. So fashion responded, as it always does, with new kind of clothing just for motoring. Now, most cars at the turn of the century, now you have to remember only very wealthy people have cars, and they didn't really know what to do with them. They just went out to drive. Most cars didn't have a roof on them, and so ladies had to dress in a way that would keep the dust from the road off their clothing. And this sort of coat was invented, and it was called duster, and we still call them dusters, don't we? And look at her goggles, and also her big motoring scarf. There was a whole new realm of retail that catered just for clothing to drive in. Look at this, Gamagers, the leading motor tailors, every comfort for winter motoring. And veils and motor scarves, like you can see in this ad here, were all the rage for the fashionable set when they went motoring. Like this. She's using it, as you can see there, this huge scarf to help keep her rather huge hat on. And take a look at this. That's creepy. Her veil is all over her face, and then she has her goggles on. And here is a contemporary take on the turn of the century. But really, the big story, the Edwardian era, was probably the shirtwaist. Basically, a shirtwaist was a blouse, and everybody wore shirtwaists. You would always wear your shirtwaist with a skirt like this. It was long, it was made out of a sensible textile, like wool, for example, or tweed, something like that, always in dark colors. Right, so it was durable. It was heavy, it was durable, we didn't have to launder it so often. But your blouse, your shirtwaist as it was known, that could be laundered more frequently to keep you fresh. Everybody wore shirtwaists. You know those really high fashion ladies that we looked at a few minutes ago with their long lacy dresses with artificial roses all over them? When they were at home bossing their servants around, they would wear this outfit. The shirtwaist with the long, heavy skirt. A yard of Priscilla shirtwaist designs. They were a craze. People loved them and everybody owned them. And they were always white or ivory or cream. Everybody would have shirtwaists. And if you look at this image on the right here, often the skirt and the jacket, if you wore a little jacket, would match, but not always. So really this is the start of separates as we know them, but often it would be like a suit. Everybody wore shirtwaists. This was the practical everyday use. And please note that every single lady that I've shown you in this drop has a cottage loaf hairdo. There was a time, believe it or not, when people followed fashion's rules. So who made these shirtwaists? There was such a frenzy for them. There were factories, very bad conditions all over the place, especially in New York. And this is where the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was. And this is when electricity, this new invention, which was so wonderful in so many ways, failed to work. So look at this headline, it's so sad. 150 perish in factory fire. Women and girls trapped in 10-story building, lost in flames, or hurled themselves to death. Many of them just threw themselves out of the window. But because of the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire, very strict laws were imposed is the wrong word, were brought about health and safety in the workplace. The designer of the decade this time, Lucille. Actually, Lady Lucy Duff-Gordon. She was an English aristocrat and a very famous fashion designer. Look at her there, she really tried for that Gibson look, isn't she? This is her sketchbook, and you can see she very much adheres to the ideals of the day. She wasn't very innovative, she was just very famous. And this is one of her dresses. Very, very pretty. And here is another. Look at the palette. As time went on, she did actually become a little bit more innovative and a little bit more dramatic. And this is Lucille Lady Duff-Gordon on the deck of the boat. In the 1910s, you see the silhouette has changed a little bit. Lady Duff-Gordon doesn't just belong to fashion's story. She belongs to another rather epic story that you just may have heard of. What boat do you think she is on the deck of there? The Titanic. Lucy Duff-Gordon and her husband were on the Titanic. Yet she survived. There she is. She's the lady on the left. Let's look at Edwardian Gen. Here they are, very dapper. Not really that much different to what we saw in the late 19th century, are they? But take a look at this here. We see the bowler hat. We see the bowler hat come into full force. Basically, what have we got here? We've got the trouser, the waistcoat, collared shirt, the tie, and the jacket. It's Charles II's clothing rules, isn't it? But you know what? There's a lot more you can learn. And if you would like to learn more about Edwardian male fashion, take menswear with Professor Cockle. It's a wonderful course that really gets into the nitty-gritty of menswear through the ages. Well, Edwardian romance lives on. Here are runway images that I think really speak to the Edwardian fashion aesthetic.